Yeah, so before we talk about Edge, I think it's worth knowing that two of the founding partners of Hill have done this before. This is not their first rodeo in child healthcare. Going back to the late 2000s, two of the founding partners are actually involved in a childcare roll-up that was listed on the ASX and eventually sold to ABC Learning at quite a reasonable price. Most markets work in cycles. Most markets are cyclical and pockets of that market. So after the childcare cycle had played out in the mid sort of 2014-15, these guys saw the opportunity to come back into this space. And where they've done this well is they're buying the asset on day one and building that asset. So they're not buying a business, they're building that asset in like a suburban growth corridor or one step removed from the CBD. And that's really helped them during COVID. They've been smart about that. You still had childcare centres operating around suburbs and the fringes of the city, but CBD they were shut down. When you think about actually buying these centres, a huge issue for childcare centres is staff turnover, or a staff member calling up at the last moment saying they're sick and they can't work. That's a huge problem. So to create efficiencies, you want to build childcare centres in a cluster around each other. So if there's a suburban growth corridor, you might put 3 or 4 centres within a population of a few suburbs, and that way you can rotate staff through different centres to suit needs, even down to that day. And so from economies of scale perspective, that makes a lot of sense for Edge. So Montessori education is an education syllabus invented by Maria Montessori, and it really focuses on getting the best out of your child to leverage against their interests. And so let's just use this as an example. Your daughter comes home one day, she's 3 years old from kindy and says, Mummy, Daddy, I want to be an astronaut. I want to fly to the moon and discover the moon. I want to be an astronaut. So being an astronaut or being an astrologer is a passion of hers. Montessori education wants to harness that, and it focuses on them building a syllabus that is specific to your child. When we went to school, it was a scholastic program, it was rote learning, everybody had the same syllabus, whereas Montessori education is really about building a syllabus around your child to really, sort of get the best out of your child and enhance their prospects of going into a field of study or employment that they really love and are passionate about. So the US is quite a progressive market when you think about the US as a whole, a progressive country. They can also be quite cultish in the US. You think about the different states in the US, the different religions they follow, etc. And so as a result, we think there's some tremendous growth in that Montessori portfolio in the US, and you're seeing that with higher ground at the moment. You're also actually seeing in Australia, and we tend to maybe be a little bit more conservative when it comes to education, but some of the syllabuses are now actually being encouraged and being rolled out across the country, actually have a bit of a Montessori bias to them. And we've even seen that in some high schools in Melbourne and Sydney, where schools as a whole are wanting to learn more about the interests of the child and then building that syllabus around them to get the best out of them and to make sure that they have the best life. And so as a result of that, we think it's a thematic because the world is becoming more flexible in how they look at the world and more non-traditional, and Hill are in the right place again for this thematic in early education. So when you think about a childcare centre, you've got the business itself and you've actually got the land itself too. So what High Ground is focusing on is actually going into the operating business and rolling their model out or their syllabus out already within that operating entity. And that's far more attractive to us because let's say Higher Ground does go into a specific centre in, say, Texas in the US, and their program doesn't work, or there's pushback, or they're not happy with how that centre is running their program, well, they can exit stage left. Whereas if you're actually going into that centre in Texas, you're identifying that centre, you're building that, you're owning the land, it becomes quite a capital intensive model. So it allows you to sort of trial that syllabus or that offering within different pockets of the US. You then add resources and leverage to those sectors that are working, and you potentially exit ones that are not working. And that's why we like the capital light model.